Welcome to the Invested Teacher Podcast with Kyle Pierce, Matt Bigley, and John Orr.
Get ready to be taught as we share our successes and failures encountered during our real-life lessons, learning how to build generational wealth from the ground up.
Welcome, invested students, to another episode of the Invested Teacher Podcast. We're excited, Kyle. Let our listeners, let that listener know what we're going to be talking about today. What did we talk about in the last episode? Because this is part two of the Blueprint episodes.
Yes, you're right there, John. And we're excited to dig into this part two of your wealth building blueprint. And if you haven't heard the episode yet, you should back up to the last episode and check out part one. We dug in, and I know we talked about this at the beginning of part one. We dug into this thing called a budget. And I know that it's not sexy, it's not exciting, but it is really important. And actually, we brought up some really key pieces that I think are really important for us to consider. One of which was this idea that you already have a budget. So get that out of your mind that you have to create one. You already have one. You are living every day. Money's coming in, money's going out. The budget is in place. The question is, do you understand your budget, and how deeply are you willing to understand your budget? John, you talked about kind of doing this like line by line thing, and it's really gotten you thinking differently about how you spend. I talked about how I'm kind of more like, hey, make sure you pay yourself first and the rest can go and do whatever you want with it. It's sort of that, I will teach you to be rich book we reference. It's sort of that mentality. You might fit somewhere in between there. Matt, I feel like we didn't really get into like where you're at with your budgeting. Like, was that intentional? Like, were you like, no, I'm not budgeting
He's
at
like,
all?
I don't want to tell you guys at all.
Avoid.
Yeah. So ultimately, in that last episode, our big takeaways were this idea that you do need to understand your budget. And the second piece was this idea of paying yourself first. You need to have money going to this place, this pot, so that you can start to grow your wealth. And that might mean more or less sacrifices in different households. So that might look or sound differently. But if you're paying yourself first, you know that money has already been taken off the table, and therefore the rest will sort of take care of itself. Now, we are going to talk about some challenges for those who are listening who feel like they still don't have enough money to do this. That is going to be coming up in the next episode, so stick with us on that. But today, we're going to continue into this journey by digging into the next step of the building or the wealth building blueprint. Matt, today, where are we heading with our listeners?
Thanks, Kyle. I love this part because this is where you can really dive into both learning and action. So today we're going to talk about identifying and planning for your first investment. And I know for me, as someone who loves to learn, this is a great stage to be at. I think so many of our listeners will be big learners as well and will really enjoy this. And I want to just encourage you to spend some significant time here. Explore. I mean, they talk about analysis paralysis, and certainly some people are prone to overlearning and not taking action, but we'll talk about that later on. But at this point, I really want you to listen. So great podcast, and we can certainly link some that have been instrumental in our learning. And we've got an amazing resource we're putting together with books that we've learned and enjoyed from. I'm a constant book listener and reader. I love that quote that success leaves clues. So, in all of this, there's no reinvention necessary. It's really about deciding what works for you. And so much of that comes from learning about what's worked well for others. So as at this point, you've now understood your budget, you've understood the principle of paying yourself first, and you've started to create this seed money, this nest egg for yourself to be able to deploy. And so personally, real estate is where I first started with my investing. And I didn't get into investment properties per se until a little bit later, but inadvertently, I became a flipper without intending to become a flipper. in my early years of my marriage to Leslie, we moved 6 times in 8 years. We were really, really good at packing, really, really
You
good at
guys
moving
really,
around.
yeah, you guys really,
They're hardcore, man.
really
Yeah,
like
we
it.
were, and it was unintentional. It
times.
really came from, just being excited about renovating properties. And then the big discovery for us was this principal residence tax exemption.
Right.
Probably still one of the most, it's certainly changed and evolved, but certainly one of the most generous tax exemptions we as Canadians get. That is, when you sell your principal residence, you are not taxed on any of the gain. So one of the very few times in here for Canadians that you're not subject to paying taxes. So, and I want to be clear, we didn't always make money on houses we sold, but we learned a lot.
Yeah.
And those lessons we learned about renovating, about managing trades, about buying and selling homes, those have been instrumental to us in later on creating some real wealth through selling our principal residences. But moving so many times in such a short amount of time, as I said, inadvertently made real estate kind of our first real investment. And so we would, we'd buy a place, we would renovate it, and we'd create these beautiful spaces. And then we'd say, oh, there's a house a few streets over that we really like. And we'd, sell one and go buy the other one. And we, did this repeatedly. Of course, kids have slowed that down considerably. And also
darn kids.
an evolution in our priorities as well. I swear all the time that I don't want to be a renovator or a flipper. I'm just finishing up a flip now. So I'm eating my words there, but I think so much to learn through that experience. And then later on, particularly when I connected with you, Kyle, we started to look at investment properties, and then at the stock market and some of the other types of investments that, were out there and truly became investments, because my desire was for passive income. I didn't want to be swinging a hammer covered in dirt, running to Home Depot 62 times in a week, to get things that we'd forgotten. I really wanted to create some passive income. And that was so much different than actually physically moving all the time.
Mm-hmm. Matt, thanks for sharing that kind of beginnings of your journey and thinking about your investment. So it sounds like you inadvertently got into the real estate market by kind of just this love of redesigning spaces and seeing like how you could do that creative side of things came out for you. I'm curious, like when you got that new home, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, we're going to sell it. And then you said that the benefit for you and your family was that you didn't have to pay tax on the gain. Like all of a sudden you've created, because you sold that house and moved into another house, you've got that all of a sudden that kind of like that windfall of say, hey, I've got this chunk of money now. Did you take that money and reinvest it in the next property, or did you do something with that in the meantime? I'm curious about that kind of money, and where did that money go? Because I think our listener right now is going like, if thinking back to our last episode about creating that system for us to use our money to invest with, you're taking that maybe that chunk of money you had with your house where you sold it, and it's like, okay, how do I use that for my investment ideas? Like maybe that just kept like transitioning it into the next one and it kept building over time, or did you do
like
something with that chunk
effect, right?
Or did you like, what, now that I have this, it creates a little bit of space for me to think about my financial future. I'm curious about that chunk and what your mindset was with that windfall of money on those sales.
Yeah, thanks, John. What an interesting question. I'm going to admit something here. I was incredibly intimidated by learning about the stock market. I think this is something that our listeners might encounter at so many stages of this journey. I read some books about investing in the stock market. I listened to some podcasts, but I found it incredibly overwhelming, the amount of information and maybe so many investments in that that area, I think, can be confusing, maybe purposefully so. Maybe it's an industry thing where, you need to essentially pay someone or hire someone to help you with the investments. And then you get led to all kinds of crappy investments like mutual funds, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go into that necessarily, but I was intimidated. And so I wasn't well diversified whatsoever. What's so cool, I think, about the arc of my investing journey is that now I feel so much better diversified in my investing plan. So for us in those early days, it was all real estate. And we literally took, if we did make money, and there were a few where we didn't make money, but we would always bring that money forward to the next house. And then the next house. So that was our pot. And the downside of that was there was always a lot of risk, in the sense that when you renovate a property and you sell it, you're subject to the real estate market. You have no idea. People have discovered that this year with, the first 6 months of 2022 being gangbusters, the last 6 months being very, very different. So you're leaving yourself open to, market forces that you can't control. And then you're also leaving yourself open to just what is the resale value of a particular home. So it's so interesting because we never actually renovated these houses intending to sell them. It just sort of inadvertently happened. And in fact, we, in the process of doing that, had this really interesting offshoot where my wife started to share these properties on her social media channel. She started on Instagram way back in the day, and it just blew up. This ended up being a really interesting side hustle for her because it blew up to the point where she had brands reaching out to her, corporations, and even TV shows. At one point in time, we actually had a TV show pilot shot about us for a massive renovation we undertook, the craziest one we did. This was one we didn't make any money on, but it was an amazing experience. So Leslie's following grew through her sharing of these projects, and people just loved the space she created and the talent she created. So the show that we had a shot about us, they were going to call it the Forever Home because it was a riff on this idea of a forever home. We buy these houses and we would, make them into our forever homes. And then subsequently someone would come along and say, you know what, I love your house. Can I buy it? And Leslie would subsequently find a house that she wanted us to move to or buy. And so these dramatic transformations really became the basis of this incredible opportunity to, have this TV show created about us, or this pitch created about us, and all of these crazy renovations that, like, at the time were just unbelievable undertakings. The stress and the pain of them is now subsided, as the years have gone by. But this is really where I learned about the buying and selling of the homes, whereas Leslie really gravitated towards the design element of the home. So it was kind of a neat and totally unanticipated result of our journey into buying and renovating and then selling homes. And it's something that she, continues to do today. And she's connected to brands all over the world. We ultimately decided not to do the TV show because they wanted us to flip 10 houses a year. And, we were both full-time teachers and had little ones, and it was just too crazy. But we continue to enjoy doing these transformational renovations. Interesting side note, we just bought for the first time our very first new home. So we're not going to be renovating anymore.
I'm disappointed in you.
Yeah. You say that now. You say that
taking
now.
the easy way out.
We joke that we're, with all of our extra non-renovating time now, we're going to work on, becoming the best versions of ourselves or something like that. But it's been a pretty neat journey over the last, I guess, 12 years now. And some, this is what's so cool about this investing journey is that, like, you might start down it thinking it's going to end up one way, and you're going to grow, your wealth is going to grow, your friendships, your partnerships are going to grow, and 12 plus years later, we've certainly now made millions in real estate and in investing. It's completely changed the course of our lives and of our kids' lives. It's pretty amazing.
I love it. And for those who are watching on YouTube, friends, a lot of people listen to the podcast, just earbuds. But for those who are on YouTube, each of these episodes we do throw up on YouTube. And right now I'm doing a screen share as Matt was chatting. And this is actually the picture I was looking for, because this was one of your, past projects in LaSalle. And there's sort of like a before and not quite after, but kind of like almost after, if that makes sense, kind of side by side, just looking at the transformation. And this particular house, this is the Tanglewood property, I think was the street it was on. And going into that house and just being like wowed by the work that, you know, both you and Leslie, and I know Leslie has a lot of that visioning, and you line up all those contractors and sort of, you know, bring it together. That partnership has obviously led to some pretty awesome results, both from a beautifying perspective, but then also a financial standpoint as well. And, you know, I like, you know, up here for those who are watching, this is Leslie's Instagram. She is the Leslie Style on Instagram and has like, you know, what, 50, 60,000 followers, something like that, of people who are just, you know, inspired to check out some of the wonderful, wonderful work. And I'm way, way deep here, like years ago. And, you know, just looking through here, you could scroll all day. I know my wife is good friends with Leslie, but also follows just to, you know, get a couple glimpses of some of the beautiful shots that she has going there. So definitely worth a follow if you have not yet. Lots of amazing stuff going on there. Now, Matt, I'm like just thinking of your story, and it's something that like never occurred to me, but it sounds like you both took, like, that was your entry or entrance into investing, right? Like that was sort of where you began. It began as a passion.
Inadvertently. Yeah.
Yeah, like it was like a passion project. And I think that's the part that I think is really important for people to be thinking about as they're picking their first investment, is what is something that they're going to be interested and willing to do the work in, right? And because if you're not interested, if you have no interest whatsoever, it's like you might push yourself to get started, but are you going to see it through? Now, some people, maybe they're just never going to be that person. And, you know, we do have some ideas for you as well. That's going to be coming up in the next episode, some paths that you might take if you're like, listen, I love my job. Like maybe you're listening and you're a teacher like we are. And like, we love our jobs as educators. We just also love doing this work too. Maybe you're just like, I just love teaching and that's it. And I've got this little pot of money and I'm not exactly sure what to do with it. We will address that in the next episode. But I'm wondering, like, for those who are thinking, like, I want to flip to John now, and I want to learn a little bit, like, because John, your story completely different on where you began than say Matt. And we haven't like gotten to the end of Matt's journey yet, because, you know, Matt and I do a ton in the real estate world right now. But like, John, you're at like a different place. And I'm sure there's going to be some listeners that are like, yeah, I'm not ready to like move every 7 months like Matt did. There's got to be another way. So like, where's your head at, and where did you begin this journey?
Yeah. So I guess I view myself as a very early stage investor and a person who is a very cautious investor as well. So in our first episode, I talked about, you know, we're all teachers, but I was that very traditional math teacher, and I had this upbringing when we talked about our financial future, that my pension from my teaching job here in Ontario, it was going to set me for life. I didn't have to think about my future investment self. And I had that mindset from my parents, and also the mindset that, you know, you're going to buy your house, you're going to pay your mortgage off, and then that was going to be kind of your nest egg. Yay. Hey, if you ever need,
and that is an option though, right, John? Like,
we talked about that in episode 2, right? So it was about paying and all the things that we think about around our mortgage and our home. And so I think my journey started to change though, actually, when I met you guys, and started to change some of my thinking towards how I viewed my financial place. And I knew that I was safe, but it was, I think, Kyle, you had recommended, you know, we started to do some dabbling in a side hustle around our math, providing professional development for teachers with math teaching and math lessons. And when we started to build that, you know, that pot of kind of resources up as a side hustle for us, it started to make me think about where we could, or where I should think about my money in terms of where we could put that money, but also like what I'm doing with my personal money. And I think you recommended, we talked about this also in episode 1, the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which helped me think about buying assets versus where my money was going. And I think I was always thinking my house was going to be kind of an asset, but in that book, they make the argument that your house is not an asset. You're always going to be paying taxes on your house, and you're always going to be putting money out of your pocket, not putting money into your pocket. So that got me on this idea of thinking about, how do I buy assets? And I think I came up with, and at this point, thinking about how do I buy those assets, I would say probably within that first year, there was like 2 asset classes that I started to slowly get into. And I think it was from your guys' help to say, I can do this safely. One was the stock market. How do I invest in the stock market? Because I was always scared of investing in the stock market. Like, I did not want to put my money in there. I was, hey, I'm going to go to the bank. I'll buy a mutual fund with my money, because the bank will make sure it's safe. But after reading the book we talked about in the last episode, how to, I'll Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, he talked about mutual fund is not a great spot for you to put your money. You're better off putting them in index funds, because you're going to get more over the course of the time. Index funds always, are a measure of the market, and all these mutual funds are always trying to beat the market, but they never do beat the market on a consistent basis. So an index fund is actually better for you in the long run. Less fees. You're not paying someone to manage your money. That's what the index fund is to kind of measure the general trajectory of the market. And I think that book helped me understand that we can do that very, in a more safe way. And I think, Kyle, you recommended another book that helped me think about the stock market, that made it seem more safe in a way to get into the stock market as an asset class. And that book was called Rule Number 1, by Phil Towns. And that was like, gave a blueprint on how to think about stocks, on how to choose the right stock, like how to choose a stock that had a moat, around it, so that, you could think about making sure that this stock was going to be around for a long time, and that wasn't going to go anywhere. It wasn't going to be like, you're going to buy a stock that's going to be all of a sudden out of business in a couple of years. Like, we're looking at stocks that are blue chip stocks that have been around for a long time. They're not going to go anywhere. They have a good basis of competition around them, but they're also very strong companies. Gave you a nice blueprint to think about that, and things to look at, and gave me, being a math teacher, and very analytical, it gave me a sense of like, I can look at these statistics around these companies and choose one that, or a few that are going to, be safe, and where I can put some of the extra flow of money that I had from, redesigning my budget, like we talked about in the last episode. So it was a smaller way to get into this asset class, where I picked like Disney, I picked like Nike, I picked like these companies that we all know about, and I felt good about it. And I think that was one of the first times I started to dabble into money and having control of my financial future, versus letting the bank control it, or letting my pension control it. That was my first taste. The other thing was that you guys, by running your investment company and your real estate company, I partnered with you, the two of you, to buy a property and be a JV partner, a joint venture property, that we bought together a few years ago. I was, thinking about what other assets can I buy? I want to be able to use and produce this future that I've imagined, and I wanted my money to build money, like compound effect on it. And so we bought a property together that it was really nice for me to get into that world and thinking about in real estate investment and how to analyze real estate or properties. But it felt safe because I partnered with the two of you, like you guys have, Matt, obviously we just heard Matt's story about how much experience he had. Kyle, you've done so much learning around this and helped me with it, but it was very safe to kind of partner with you because I felt like we were doing it together, and you had all this experience of managing the property, understanding how to pick the property. And for me, being new to that, I could learn alongside you, but also get into the real estate market as well to kind of keep that going. So I'm still early in my stages, but those are the first two kind of areas I changed my financial future. One being easy, safe stocks, and then also stepping into the real estate market with some partners. So those are two. Now I've progressed a little bit along with other ideas that we can talk about in future episodes as well. But I think those are the first two that are, for a listener who's also starting, partnering with somebody is a good first step, but also, grabbing some books about getting into buying assets. One of them being the stock market can be very helpful.
John, your comments kind of make me wonder, your exploratory pathway sounds like it was both based on some really great book recommendations and then some sort of, some co-learning or finding what felt like a really safe entry point into the real estate end of things. Are people in your teaching circles exploring too? Are they asking you for, for advice or recommendations on how do they start to explore this stuff? And when they do that, like, what do you recommend? Do you sort of play that role of Kyle, where maybe recommending some good books or having those, conversations about it? Like, how are you helping others explore? People must be curious when they hear about what you're doing.
Yeah, you know what? It's kind of like no, it wasn't discussed before I was doing it. It was discussed as I was learning and then after. So it's kind of like one of those things. It's like I think, like that whole red car phenomenon where you're like, I'm going to buy this red car, and you never see the red car. Like, I'm going to pick that car because it's like unique. And then everywhere you go, you see it everywhere else. It's all of a sudden, it's like in your field of vision everywhere. And you're like, I thought before I thought about this thing, I never saw it. Now I see it everywhere. And this happens a lot of the times. Like, I felt like that happened with my investments as well. It's like no one at school was talking about investments, but then everyone was talking about investments after. Maybe it was just because I wanted to talk about it and I wasn't listening before.
Maybe it was you that was talking. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so yeah, I was in way more conversations at school with teachers who were also looking to get investments and change their investments. And at one time we were in the staff room, a teacher says, well, like, John, what would you do? Like, all of a sudden I have this chunk of change. Like, where would you put like this $20,000? And I think we started to talk about what I had learned. And I think that went down the path of looking at index funds as a place to put some of the money that you might have. And then we talked about some real estate. So yeah, my role that happens at school when I talk about investments with other teachers is recommending good readings like those books, but also sharing some of the strategies that I've been using over the course of the last couple of years. Like, I remember having some really interesting conversations with teachers about buying and selling options as a way to generate some cash flow along the side of owning some of these asset classes. Teaching them about how that works, and all of a sudden kind of playing that coaching role, but playing it the way Kyle used to play it with me, very, very light, very kind of like, hey, this is out here, maybe you want to look at this here, maybe you want to go learn about it here, this is the way I learned about it. So I think that's been nice for me to have these conversations with people at school, but also a great way to kind of make me think about what I'm doing with my strategies, because when you start to share and teach other people about these strategies, it makes you rethink, are you doing the right thing? Are you on the right track? I think that's been a lot helpful for me as well.
I love it. And this idea of the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon is, I think, what it's called, that red car thing, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, all of a sudden, now that you're interested in something, it's like appearing everywhere, and the conversations all sort of funnel that way. My wife always says, it's like, no, you think people are talking about it, but it's like you actually make the conversation go there. So that's
totally
that's my own little, maybe negative, but yeah, that, it's interesting because seeing you and how far you've grown through this process is actually super awesome. And I mean, obviously I've seen it with Matt as well, except I think with Matt and I have sort of been growing together. And I think sometimes it's harder for us to kind of recognize it as we go, because it's like we're also experiencing that growth as we go. Whereas, you know, I've sort of had this role with you of like opening your eyes to what's possible, I suppose. And, you know, you had mentioned earlier, and I know we've talked about this on a previous episode, is this idea that if you didn't kind of go down this path, you would be fine. You know, you could just continue your teaching career and your pension's going to be enough to, you know, to allow you to live comfortably. But I guess the asterisk there is like, what does comfortably mean to you versus somebody else? And I guess it's like, what else is maybe possible? And I look at it and I think this whole journey is all about us, I guess, being lifelong learners. Every educator is a lifelong learner, and that's why we do that work. So as invested teachers and, you know, math teachers and history teachers, we want to like share this with the world. And for me, I look at it, it's so interesting to me. Like, as you learn something new, it's like you get a better understanding of how the world works, right? Like you start to better understand like what's going on out there, and you get to be like an active participant in it. So I'm super excited to continue digging in here. And I'm looking at the time, guys, and we have been chatting and riffing on some of these investment ideas. I don't think we're done the work here yet.
No.
So we will talk a little bit more about this, as well as dig into some other ideas around, you know, for those who are there thinking like, I feel like I don't have enough of my investment seed money. It's not growing fast enough for me. So we're going to have some tips for you on that, like what you might consider doing, as well as some options for those who are listening to this and thinking like, wow, like I don't want to flip my primary residence like Matt did, or I don't want to read a bunch of books like John did about, you know, investing in the stock market or investing in real estate. We're going to have some ideas or thoughts for you to consider as well, where you can still benefit from investing in some of these asset classes without necessarily having to do all of the heavy lifting. Like I'm talking to you doctors who are listening, who work like crazy hours, or teachers who are bringing home like a ton of marking. First of all, I think you're doing it wrong if you're bringing home that much marking, you know, and I argue with my sister about that all the time as an English teacher. But nonetheless, maybe you just don't have that time to commit, or maybe that willpower to commit to it right now. It doesn't mean that you can't be an invested student. So we'll have some tips for you in the next episode. Friends, my big takeaway here is that there are so many different possibilities on how you can get started. Thinking about them and just like thinking of your own situation and being creative is really, really important. So if you're a single person, maybe you start by investing in a duplex and you live in one side of it, right? You do like the house hack. Or maybe you're living with a partner like Matt was, and you're going, wow, this house could use a lot of attention and care. And if we put X amount of dollars into it, we think it could be worth this amount. And then all of a sudden now you're into your next property with some money in the bank that you can then roll into another investment. There's so many different options there. That's my big takeaway for today. How about you there, Matt? What is your big takeaway from this episode that you want people to think about and have resonate with them until next episode?
Thanks, Kyle. I've got a couple, and I think the initial one is this can look different for everyone. There's no script here. There's no one size fits all. It's really about personalizing it for yourself. And that comes with exploring. And I think one of my other takeaways is just how social this can be. John talked about how, you know, interacting with us, Kyle learning from you, now talking about it with others at school. This has become something that's social. And I mean, it's funny. This is really all I want to talk about these days. I'm probably annoying, but I've seen my friendships evolve to the point where, you know, the people that are also into this have become some of my best friends. And those that are on a different trajectory or different track, we've just kind of grown out of one another's lives because I'm just so obsessed with learning about this, discovering about this, having these huge epiphanies. and doing it together. So the social part of it is both makes it really enjoyable. And as John said, with the joint ventures, it also makes it really, really safe as well.
Good thing. Yeah, those are some good takeaways there, Matt. And if we think about the blueprint that we're on right now, and thinking about changing our financial future and creating a financial future for yourself, in the past episode, the one that just happened, we talked about two strategies in the blueprint, one being create the budget. Second one was paying yourself first. Those are two strategies to put you on the pathway to be in a position to choose an investment. In this episode, we talked about the third strategy, or the third step in that blueprint, which is about choosing your first investment, or identifying and planning your first investment. We talked about a few different ways you can think about that. We gave our stories about where we started to help give you some ideas on how you can plan your investments. We're also going to do that in a future episode, because we need to go into some more. We've got, that's 3 of the 5 different strategies and steps we're going to talk about on this blueprint. So in our next episode, we're going to talk about 2 more strategies on your blueprint to your financial future. Kyle, let's leave this episode with some of the ending credits that you normally roll through. Let's do it.
Absolutely. Friends, listen, this is a brand new podcast. This is just, what is this? The 4th episode, I believe.
Only 4th. Yes.
4th episode, which means you hitting the subscribe button and leaving a 5-star rating and review will allow this podcast to reach a wider audience. So we are depending on you. If you found some value from this, take a moment and go ahead and hit that 5-star rating and review. Or maybe you're watching on YouTube right now, hit subscribe, give a thumbs up, and maybe leave a comment. It means a ton. And really, the internet algorithms will thank you, because then they know that they need to share this with a wider audience. After you're done that, feel free to follow us on all social media at Invested Teacher on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and even on TikTok. Are we even going to do that, guys? But I guess we are. Here we are. Yeah, we're going to be on TikTok. Look at that. We are looking forward to connecting with you on all social media platforms.
We've talked so much about what a social adventure this can be. We want you to share this podcast with your friends and family so you can learn alongside them and explore alongside them. All links, resources, and transcripts from this episode can also be found over on our website. That's investedteacher.com/episode4.
Awesome there. Yeah, and we also have a PDF download for you, which is on the blueprint. So on the 5 strategies, you can get them right now. Head on over to investedteacher.com/blueprint. That's investedteacher.com/blueprint. And you can start planning your financial future right now. You don't have to wait until next week and get the next episode. You can do it right now. All right, invested students, that's it from us from this episode. Class dismissed.
And my friends, before we go, just a heads up that there is no investment advice intended on any and all of our episodes. The content is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or any other advice. It sounds like, guys, don't listen to a thing we're saying, is what we're saying.
It's just for entertainment purposes only.